Welcome back to the Books Brothers podcast, where each week we read, discuss, and challenge each other to become better men and have a few laughs in the process. The Books Brothers are currently reading The Mask of Masculinity, How Men Can Embrace Vulnerability, Create Strong Relationships, and Live Their Lives to the Fullest, written by Lewis Howes. This week, Garrett leads our discussion as we unpack the Joker Mask. In the episode, we learn how men hide behind being a jokester or a funny guy, and break down how men use comedy to cover up feelings associated with pain, not fitting in, and or staying relevant amongst others. After the show, please share your comments and feedback on the chapters by emailing us at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com.
Hey, I'm going to say it. If I haven't shared yet, I'm going to say it now. On this date, November 1st, 2023, I think there will be a product that's actually made based on these made-up ads.
Guys, so I wasn't kidding. I just got back from Italy and we bounced around. We spent 4 or 5 days in Rome and then did 2 kind of big excursions, with a bus with 14 of us. And we had a 6-hour drive. And I would be like, give me what's a problem you need solved. I'll write an ad. And I would come back with after 5 minutes later, and I stopped the whole bus, 14 people, and read them my ad, and the whole bus was just cracking up. And then, my structure, how I'm like, are you blah, 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 or blah, blah, blah. Now introducing blah, blah, blah. And I literally got 4 people all throughout the rest of our trip. They'd come up to me and they'd be like, Rob, are you tired of blah, blah, blah?
So last year, on the way to Rob's bachelor party, I was in the airport. I think it was in Austin. It may have been Dallas. I don't quite remember. But I was just in line to get coffee, trying to kill time, waiting for Flez and other people to get there so we can carpool to the Airbnb. But I kept seeing...
So you could ice everyone?
Yeah. But I was just standing in line to get coffee, and it was a long line. And these people just kept walking up to this person behind me. And I was like, yeah, they probably just know each other from something. And then this one guy in particular walked up and he brought out his phone. He's taking a picture, a selfie with him. And I turned around and it was JP Sears that he mentions in this chapter, the redheaded, long hair comedian, YouTube comedian. You've probably seen some of his videos. Look him up. But yeah, I was standing right in front of him in line.
You knew who he was, or it just clicked all of a sudden?
I recognize that guy.
So I recognized him, but I didn't know from where at first. I looked him up later in the airport.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Books Brothers podcast. Really excited for the conversation today, talking about the Joker Mask. Boys, good to see everybody. I'm glad everyone's
here. Nice shirt there, by the way, Garrett.
Yeah, hey.
I keep all my dad jokes
in a database. It's amazing how you become a dad and it's literally like a switch that's flipped. You just think of these jokes and they just come. It's amazing.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, man, you're good. You're good. So thanks for the joke. See, there we go. I'm not hiding behind anything with that statement, but in all seriousness, maybe we'll have to decode a lot of things because, this week we are talking about the Joker Mask. I think we're over halfway through the book. We're on the tail end of it. One of the last few masks that Lewis Howes addresses. And just from some of the text messages that have gone on, some of the discussion we've had before recording this, it sounds like a lot of guys on this call identify with this mask a lot. And I know I do, not just for myself, but also with my family. And so it's going to be a good conversation and I'm excited to dive in. As we typically do, I'll go ahead and give a bit of a recap and we'll dive into the conversation. So with the Joker Mask, many men choose to hide behind a joke rather than share in true vulnerability and openness. In this chapter, the author talks a lot about the life and tragic death of Robin Williams. That was a key component of the reading. Bringing others joy through laughter can often help us forget about the hard things that we're currently dealing with. But are we doing this to ultimately deflect our true thoughts? Robin Williams seemed to be loved by all and brought us a lot of joy through his movies, but we learned throughout his life he dealt with cocaine and alcohol dependence as well as severe depression. This is a common trend, maybe not the exact drug, but it's a common trend with individuals, not just in comedy, oftentimes in comedy, but also outside of it in our own lives for those of us who are not full-time comedians. Specifically with comedians, the author talks about some data and some people, some psychologists he interviewed about how comedians are more likely to have chaotic upbringings, which lead to increased likelihood of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and anxiety. But this doesn't just apply specifically to comedians. The author also shares a conversation with one of those professors he interviews. The professor talks about her personal experience with her son and how he and his friends will hurl insults at each other, which he and his friends justify with the statement at the end, quote, "just kidding." It's here that Lewis shares the commonly heard phrase, quote, "hurt people hurt people." He continues to discuss how men struggle to sit in an emotional moment and use humor to ease the tension. The chapter ends with a clarification on humor, just like almost every mask we've discussed. The importance of joy, laughter, and positive expression. Being a joker, comedian is not in and of itself bad, and it has its good place. But he asks a very good question. Are we using humor to avoid serious reflection as well as sarcasm to distance ourselves from others? Or does our humor add to the joy of our life and those close to us? So to open it up, guys, in the chapter, Lewis says, quote, "I didn't think I could contribute intelligence to my friend groups, whatever circle he was in. So instead, I brought humor, especially around my family." So can you all relate to that at all?
So I think for me, Garrett, I'm hung up a little bit on the word intelligence. I don't know if I necessarily struggled with that as much. If anything, it would be relevance or significance. Adam or Stalen, I know I kind of talked with you a little bit about that word significance. It's kind of been popping up this past year with just things in my life, whether that's at work or whether that's, my wife doing a show with people that have had success on Netflix shows, on Broadway, and almost feeling less significant as a man because I do a totally different trade that thousands of people aren't coming to adore me or, come watch me. And so there's been these like feelings of significance of, will people forget about me, or will I stay relevant within certain friends or certain friend groups? And how do I, make up for that? And, with me, with that question, it's less of intelligence and it's more around, how do I stay funny? How do I stay relevant within people in my life so that they know that, hey, if anything, Rob's going to bring a good time. Rob's going to bring laughter. I think there's some pain behind that realization, but I think that there's also joy in it too. Just talking to you guys about my Rome pilgrimage over the past week, like, sure. Yeah, maybe there was an opportunity for me to stay relevant within a group of 14 people and to let them know that I can contribute to the group. But at the same time, man, we had a ball creating these fake ads and it was a lot of fun and it brought a lot of joy at the same time.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I approach the question.
Yeah, Rob, I feel like I've seen you get more reflective over the years. I feel like in college, I kind of just recall you wanting to like joke around a lot. I remember you being like, but you also had like the switch that you would turn on when you would do school stuff, but it was like funny Rob, like playful Rob, and then it was like school Rob. And they were very different people. So yeah, this quote I really related to. Adam, I'm trying to remember did we kind of start hanging out in like high school or was it some middle school too?
7th grade, frosted tips, bro. Don't ever forget.
There you go. Well, so I'd be curious to hear kind of your like what you recall. But in elementary school and in 6th grade, I was just like really quiet, like obedient kind of kid. Didn't speak up a lot in class, and I kind of started to realize like I could get attention by like making jokes and being kind of like a class clown, like not being as serious. And so this kind of started probably in 6th grade and then like got way more intense in 7th grade. And in 7th grade, I actually like almost failed classes. Whereas like in the past, I was like a fairly straight A type student, but I really think that I was someone who like I intentionally did bad and acted dumb to get attention from people. And I really feel like I got out of that phase like after 7th grade and I started doing better academically. But I really feel like that was like, I was like, oh, I wasn't really maybe the most athletic. I wasn't like among like other boys. I wasn't like bigger. And so I was like, oh, I can get attention by like being really goofy. And I remember like trying to get lunch detention like pretty often, just doing stupid stuff to get attention.
I think 8th grade is when we started hanging out more, and I think I remember you being a lot different between 7th and 8th grade for sure. Yeah.
No more frosted tips.
Maybe I should take credit for that. You changing and becoming a better man.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that part of it was me coming out of my shell a little bit. Like I think like there was a lot of good in that, but I also think that there was some things that were just me being, I don't know, just seeking attention.
Yeah, it's normal, I think, in middle school too. I mean, it's a weird time.
I can definitely relate with various stages of my life. I've always felt to some extent that I have never, and I do say never, like genuinely, not trying to exaggerate. I'll say oftentimes, more often than not, haven't necessarily fully fit in to the groups that I'm in per se. I transitioned from a private to public school in high school. And so going back to the previous conversation about sports, I felt like as a guy, sports and humor are ways to quickly fit in and be identified as cool or someone worthy to spend time in. So that was high school. And then just never feeling like I have fully fit in. Like, I don't know whether it was like, I think even from a younger age, I took my spiritual walk pretty seriously. And so I never felt like I necessarily always fit in on the football team with some of the jokes that were being shared, or all of you can probably relate to in the fraternity. I think at least one year I remember being called the J Crew or whatever, which is fine. But stuff like that where it's like, well, if I can be good at sports, or if I can be funny, that can compensate for the different values that I have that might make people feel uncomfortable, or fill in the blank, or being the new guy at the school, or being the new guy in the fraternity, whatever it is. I would say even now I can relate in one sense, and I don't want to dip into the second question too much about if we experience it more or less now, as we get older, but I do still feel the tension of wanting to fit in all the same. And humor is one of those ways, and feeling like I'm not fully fitting in is one of those ways where it's like, let's go to humor. And that's a really quick way. Being sarcastic, feeling like you can vibe out the conversations that other people are having and fit in with the conversation. So I would say now returning back to Oklahoma City. So it's like, well, if I can identify with them on OU Sports and Oklahoma City Thunder, and if I can pick up on the sarcasm and run with them on the jokes, then I can more easily kind of slide in and fit in. So I think it's something that I can think back as far back as high school and freshman year, and even in experiences in junior high where I felt like I got picked on, and using humor as a way to fit in, even up till now. It might look a little bit different. My identity is less and more caring about wanting people's to care about me and like include me, but there's always like some tension of wanting to fit in, and humor is a way to do that.
Yeah, I can relate to using humor as a way to fit in, but never thought about it that way. It's always been, subconsciously doing it, just being an extreme introvert. It's kind of a way to get out of your shell and be a little bit more extroverted, using humor. Yeah, just constantly thinking and being so introspective all the time. It's good to kind of get out of your head sometimes to be around people, but if you're, tend to isolate more and do more introverted things, it can be harder to be around people sometimes, and using humor as a way to make it more comfortable is a little easy at times. And I think it's just something that I've developed as a habit. I don't even think about it really. Yeah, I mean, obviously I can relate to a lot of this chapter. This is the chapter that I identify the most with, having struggled with depression on and off. It's a really phenomenal way to deflect the way that you're feeling internally, for sure. Yeah. But a lot of times it's not even like you're doing it knowing that. You're just kind of doing it. Nobody's like thinking, I'm going to say a joke to feel better. You just kind of do it.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to put focus on making other people feel better because you don't want them to feel like you do. So, watching somebody laugh, or for me, I do that, but also, watching somebody get stronger or healthier, or like get them literally out of pain with something, it kind of helps my internal struggles.
Yeah.
Which I think that's a good thing. But I think if you're not, I think like he says, if you're using it as a way to neglect yourself, that's when it's bad. And so it's just kind of having that awareness. Awareness is the most important thing, for first step for any kind of issue. But that being said, like I said, I am very introspective, so I don't personally avoid deep conversations. Obviously, I don't think I would be involved in this group if I did. But it is something that I obviously still kind of battle with, and I don't know. I want to get into some of this other stuff, but I'll wait. But that's my 2 cents on that.
Well, and I think like one thing as you're talking, Adam, that I can relate to, it's like, but can you go to the deeper levels? Like, can you go into the deeper conversations and stuff? And I've definitely seen you that way. But I think there was a friend that I had in high school that I was thinking about during this chapter. Hilarious guy, like really good guy. Spent a lot of time with him, played music with him. Really always enjoyed being around him. But he was someone that he was just constantly joking. And I would say I knew him for probably a good year and a half till we started having like more deep conversations about like his life and such. And it really made me realize, like, as I was reading this chapter, I kind of thought on, like, I compared him and put him in kind of the shoes of Robin Williams there. And I was like, oh, I think maybe he just, kind of more internal dialogue and kind of chose humor to kind of cover that up. Because I don't know if you guys have had a friend like that where you feel like you just can't have a serious conversation. And so it's great to have people in your life, friends in your life, that bring you a lot of like joy through laughter. But having a friend for several years that was all like joking was so constant, it was kind of tiring at times. There was times where I was like, all right, let's get serious for a second here. And, actually having like real conversations. And I really, for the first time in this reading, I was like, oh, maybe I kind of like a light bulb kind of off of like, oh, that was probably what was going on in that situation.
I never thought of myself as a really funny person, but I would definitely use humor to avoid awkward situations or conversations, or to make myself feel better about myself. And it's kind of funny to think about the humor that we had in middle school. Like, Garrett, you can probably remember half of my conversation in middle school was just quoting Anchorman or Dumb and Dumber or Zoolander, and just like a group of guys quoting the movie. And I mean, it was very funny to me at the time, but I think
it was so funny.
I'm still quoting Dumb and Dumber, man.
Oh, man.
I have to tell one funny story. One that I will never forget. I still think about it is like, think we were in college and we were serving in the youth group, and we were like doing something. We were working all day. And like we were having it was a serious like day. We're working hard, and I was like, "Hey, do you want to go grab lunch?" And like it was just so normally like, I swallowed a big June bug on the way over here. I'm not really hungry. And like it to this day sticks with me about how like it was like a normal conversation, and I just died, and I never forget that. It was so good. So
I'm really proud of that.
Sorry for speaking over you. I just had to give you that shout out. So it was
all good.
Appreciate it.
I appreciate it. But yeah, looking back years ago, I think it was a way to avoid those awkward situations or uncomfortable moments for me, because I use humor kind of as an icebreaker. Because if I don't know what to say, maybe I'll just quote Anchorman or quote Zoolander to get the conversation rolling. But then, conversation can come from that afterwards. Like it breaks the tension, it breaks the ice to lead into other conversations.
Matt, I did quote Dumb and Dumber at least like 15 times over the past week. Marianne, she doesn't think that dumb humor is as funny as like self-sabotaging humor. Like if someone like trips and falls, she finds that more funny than Dumb and Dumber. But man, there were some Dumb and Dumber fans on the trip, but we were having a good time.
That's awesome. Yeah, Brooke just default guesses any movie quote I make is from Dumb and Dumber, and 75% of the time she's accurate. Yeah, and I think like what we're all saying, those things are not bad. I mean, icebreakers, adding joy and life to people, like those are all really good things.
Let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Ladies, if you're like me, your man's silent farts cause serious strain on your relationship. The last thing you want after a hard day's work is to come home and have your house smelling like a cow patty. Well, let me introduce you to my friends at Stink Zap. Stink Zap is the first air freshener that can also detect hydrogen sulfide, the chemical that causes your house to smell like a landfill. Plug it in just like you would your carbon monoxide detector and let it do the rest. Now you can look forward to coming home to a house that smells fresh and clean. It's not fair to you to have to wait for your man to mature and hold it in. Instead, treat yourself to the home aromas you deserve. Stink Zap, rescuing marriages through the healing powers of fresh air.
Whoa, mic drop.
Bravo.
Let's go.
I'm like a little bit offended, but.
And now back to the show.
Some of you have hit on it already, and that kind of segues us to the next part of the recap. Talking about Goodwill Hunting for a minute is deflecting, and what you said, Stalen, not being able to, it's not just about being humorous, it's can you ultimately get to that conversation, the serious talks, or is it just completely a mask so that you never have to dive into that? And so I've seen this movie once. It was a while ago, but the scene specifically that Lewis mentions is definitely worth a rewatch. So Will Hunting, which is Matt Damon's character, is clearly uncomfortable with just sitting with another man at the park having a conversation about life, and tries to use humor as a wall with his counselor, Dr. Sean McGuire, which is played, oddly enough, by Robin Williams. Sean takes him to school in this scene, challenging Will about his lack of understanding of how complex and deep relationships and life can be. He calls Will cocky and scared, hiding behind his intellect. This scene teaches us about the wisdom learned through experiences and what it means to truly be open to others in our lives. It showcases that hiding behind the Joker mask is a sign of immaturity and being stuck in boyhood ways. So as we've all aged and gotten older, have you noticed yourself or men in your lives using humor more or less often? And do you see them, other men or yourself, using humor as a strategy to avoid deeper topics?
I think, first off, Good Will Hunting is a phenomenal movie. Great movie. Adam and I probably watched that 6 or 7 times together in middle school with our other friend, Brett. Our friend Brett could probably quote the whole movie. But one thing, as I read through this chapter and kind of think on this question, when adults, like adult men, like talk about other people, they'll like, what are the attributes or characteristics that they give them? So let's say you're like in a work setting and someone's like, hey, we're going to go work with so-and-so, or hey, have you met so-and-so? I feel like the most common thing that people say is he's a really funny guy. And I just think it's interesting as it like relates to this question, because it's almost like that's like the phrase for like, oh, he's a good guy, or like, oh, he's like qualified. But I almost find that it's like, or is there also maybe a component of that where that's maybe all you see someone as? It's like, oh, he just jokes a lot and that's kind of fun. And as we've gotten older and such, I think, Matt, you mentioned a couple weeks ago how as we get older, we don't have as many friends, we don't interact with as many people. And I think then because of that, it's like, I think it kind of feels sometimes like personalities become more caricatures, where you know someone and you kind of stereotype them really quickly. You pick a few attributes and like, that's who they are. And as you kind of alluded to that episode, maybe it is kind of our, like, we're just more picky with friends as we get older, or like those we interact with. But I find it very interesting that it's like the ultimate compliment for like men in our age. It's like, oh, he's that you don't know that well. Like ultimate comment for a man you like don't really know that well. It's like, oh, he's a really funny guy. And I don't know. I think it was like interesting that I thought about when I was reading this chapter. I don't know if you guys noticed that, if you agree with that, but I just feel like that's a very common characteristic people are describe guys by.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it like that,
especially in dating.
I think it makes sense. Like I've definitely heard that or referred to people as that before, at least in the workplace setting. I don't know. I mean, Stalen, what you were saying about me in college, where it's like, yeah, there's jokester Rob, and then there's like school Rob, like dialed in, focused. Yeah. And I think in the workplace setting, you're probably less likely to be more like vulnerable and like real with your coworkers, because you're there to do the job and telling jokes and quoting Dumb and Dumber, in between meetings or your day, like that kind of breaks it up a little bit, right? Where it's like, I'm not really using coworkers as therapy buddies.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like that. Yeah. Like I'm sure some people would say like, oh, he's super analytical or good with Excel or whatever, right? But I think there's some truth in what you're saying about like, oh, he's a funny guy. But I know you just asked that question, so I want to give time for people to answer the question. But I did write down like a thought, and it kind of goes in with this question of, when we aren't doing well and people ask us, how are we doing? Like, are we honest with them? Do we tell them like, hey, I'm actually having like a really crappy day? Or like, do we just put up the wall or the mask and tell a joke? I know, like, I don't know, a month or so ago, I was having a pretty like crappy day. And I think I was pretty honest and like open with you guys about just like, dude, this day sucks. I'm kind of over it. Like, just some crap happened here, some crap happened there. And like, how many of us really say, no, actually, I'm not doing great, or no, actually, I didn't have a good weekend. And then I'm interested with like, if someone were to answer that, how many of us would like stop and be like, oh man, like, do you want to talk about that? Or do we just kind of blanket it and say, man, I'm sorry to hear that, and then go on? Just something I was thinking about when reading this and kind of getting to that question a little bit.
Yeah, Adam asked me that question. Adam Stalen asked me that question just this past Saturday, and I was very appreciative of it. So thank you, Stalen. And it was one of those times where he just asked me how I was doing. I was like, yeah, I'm doing just okay. Like, could be better. He's like, yeah, what's going on? And I was able to actually tell him, and I felt comfortable telling him what was actually bothering me. And I think it kind of depends on the person, like you were saying, Stalen. Like, it depends on who I'm talking to, if I want to go deeper with that person, or if I just want to make a joke and not be vulnerable with a person that I don't know quite as well. I think, if it's someone that I don't know all that well, or like coworkers, like you guys were saying, I probably would lean more towards saying some kind of joke or just blowing it off, rather than saying, I'm not having a good day, here's why. if it's a close friend, then I would be more likely to go into that deeper conversation. But I think part of the point of this book club is to be vulnerable with people. And that's probably something that I should be more open about with people that I don't know quite as well.
I think for me, this is an area where I have almost overcorrected in. And that when I was younger, I used to isolate a lot, and I still do that sometimes. But wanting to avoid being the dark cloud in other people's lives is something that I used to struggle with a lot. It kind of ties back into that whole idea of like, you are in pain and you want to like make somebody laugh or feel better. And that's something where I've overcorrected on. And now if somebody does ask me how I'm doing, if I just like, you know, they're not even like my friend, I'll tell them. It's like, that's probably an overcorrection almost. I don't know, but I don't know. That's
I mean, hey, they asked for it.
Right.
Well, I think
like,
Matt, I think Matt, honestly, as you were talking, I think in my mind, I think that if a stranger asks me or someone I don't really know that well, I am pretty open with them. And I was like, I think Adam is too, because I feel like I've seen that in you. So, and again, it's like, is that good or bad? I don't know. I mean, I just had a very deep, sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think for me, the honesty and getting it out there is more healing for me personally. So I would rather be vulnerable and honest than like in that moment I say a joke and then like that becomes the habit again. And then it's like, then I'm not authentic in me again. It's like, I don't know. So like if that person takes what I say not well, they're probably not going to be in my life anyway. So it's like, you know what I mean? I think it's just better to be open and vulnerable. So there are probably, you know, situations that are, you know, but
Yeah. I mean, it's easier to it takes less effort to make the joke in a way, right? Sometimes it takes effort to think of something corny or witty, but I shared at the beginning before we hit record, but I shared a couple episodes back when we were discussing the sexual mask, a couple things I'd never shared before. And I don't think I realized how much that had kind of weighed on me subconsciously. And it ties into this in the sense of what you're saying of when I shared that, being open, like realizing, I'm not alone, I'm not isolated. And that kind of can be something that you do when you are depressed or you're sad, is you actually isolate more. So you like when Robin Williams coped, sometimes the author talked about how he rode bikes or still did isolating experiences where he still wasn't opening up to people. So no one knew the pain he was going through. And that was something that really stuck out to me. So it takes more effort and it's a lot scarier and more vulnerable, but the ROI, the return on investment, is so much greater for both parties, right? Because someone gets to be the recipient and being a listener, hopefully encourage you, be someone that shows they care about you. That's a really meaningful thing on both sides. Answering the question, getting back to the kind of the basis of the question, like getting older, have we seen humor used more or less often? I'll share something like a different take, spending time overseas and living in a different culture, living in China total for 1.5 years when I studied abroad in college. And then while I worked over there for a year, I would say, I don't want to like be over dramatic, but I did spend enough time there that I think has played in a lot of what I shared earlier of how I felt like I don't always fit in, is coming back as like a third culture person. If you've heard that phrase, where you're not like 100% like your American Midwest culture that you grew up in. You're not, obviously, like, I was only there 1.5 years. There's no way I'd fully integrate into Chinese culture, but I've taken some things from my time in China, and that's impacted me in how I see the world and my worldview. And one of the things that was the hardest thing to reintegrate was the sarcasm in American culture. It was very, very difficult for me. I think a lot of it had to do with the job that I was in, but I think about it now, and I still work at a pretty humorous place, like sarcastic place. It's different. It completely is. But at the same time, at least my experience in China, Matt, I don't know if you would agree or disagree. At least in Chinese culture, like
that because I'm Asian.
you're yes.
Same but different.
No, I mean, but you've been to China though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's one. And with your mom and grandparents, there's definitely humor, of course. People laugh, all the things, but in general, if someone's sarcastic in China, they're making a legitimate insult at you. And I mean, Matt, would you agree?
Yeah, from what I remember, I would agree with that. It was difficult to be sarcastic with people over there.
Like I remember in school trying to say like, hey, in America, we'll say like, are you serious? Or like, really? Like if you're like making it, and they're like, what? Like they couldn't even comprehend. Like
that seems mean.
Yeah, it's just like, that's just weird. Why would you say that? Like sarcasm wasn't really a thing. It was very direct, honest conversation. And if you would say something sarcastic or offhand, it was typically like it's a legitimate insult. And so coming back, it was very difficult. The job I was in, I think going back to the book, I could have misjudged, but I think some of my coworkers had some underlying insecurities, and they projected themselves by just constantly making jokes. But to your point, Stalin, I could not have like a normal conversation that lasted more than a few seconds is what it felt like. And that was very difficult for me. So I don't know if it's become more or less, but I do recall certain instances where it's been very hard for me to adapt. And there have been moments where I haven't felt like I've been able to fit in because I just want to have a serious conversation. And a lot of people around me just love sarcasm and humor. And I've had to like really add sarcasm back to my vernacular to try to fit in more. So it's a weird situation at times.
Yeah. That's a great point, Garrett. One thing, just as I'm reflecting right now and just kind of speaking on that significant piece of sometimes even feeling less significant at work, whether somebody beat me to an analysis that I wanted to do or a cool new report or something like that. And it almost makes me feel like, damn, I'm slipping, and I've noticed that some of my humor has started to turn into like passive aggressiveness, where I'm like poking at people, and it's almost like a defense mechanism because I don't want to feel less significant or less relevant. So I will poke at them, and it's definitely created some rub between me and one coworker specifically, where we kind of take jabs at each other, and we know that it's like love because we know that we both respect each other's like hustle and craft and grind. But at the same time, like there's been times where it's like, dude, get off my butt. Like you ain't got nothing on me. And then there'll be times where he's like, Rob, drop it, let it go. And I can't. And I think, I don't know. There's definitely been some friction and rub with, my humor has even at times turned into passive aggressiveness, which has been a good reflection for me over the past 6 months. I would say that, man, I don't want to be that guy that people are like, oh, Rob's good at what he does, but he's kind of hard to deal with. And I'm not sure that guy would disagree with what I just said. He would probably agree with what I just said.
In the chapter, Lewis Howes, he points to that specifically, Rob. He says, the people who make fun of someone else are really deflecting their own insecurities onto that person. Hurt people, hurt other people.
Come on, Rob.
Yeah.
I think
and I can relate to that too.
There was also the reference of how the mom talking about her son and how they would say these horrible things to each other, and they'd say, just kidding. Or I think other two common phrases you also hear are no offense or I'm just messing with you. I think that like Rob, in your scenario, I could see where you're like poking at your coworker, and I could see, and I'm not saying this of you, but I play that situation out in my mind, and it's like, yeah, if someone's being passive aggressive, and then the person who who is kind of being sarcastic, if the other person gets fed up with it, they'll just say like, come on, man, like leave me alone on that. And then the person who's being sarcastic, like then is in the spot where they can say, oh, I was just messing with you. And like basically put it back on the other person of like, hey, don't get offended. And it's really, I mean, I don't know. Like I always, my mom, she says, she will say no offense, and she listens to this podcast, so I can say the story, and old Mary Stalin will be able to hear and appreciate this. But
hi, Mary.
She used to do this no offense, I feel like, pretty often, and so I will then intentionally like say really mean things and say no offense. So I'm like, Mom, you don't look that great today, but no offense. And it's like you literally can't be offended now. Because I said no offense.
And she's like,
love you, Mom.
Love you, Mom.
You play too much.
Makes me think of yet another Will Ferrell movie where it's the Ricky Bobby one where he's talking to like the owners of the car, and he's like, or the car company. He's like, with all due respect, he's like, no. That doesn't mean you can say whatever you want. He's like, well, yeah, it does. I said with all due respect. Saying it respectfully. Anyone else have any more topics on or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was just going to bring that back to my current time. Yeah, being in sales, I think I use humor just way too often. Like walk into a clinic, and sometimes it's easier to pop a joke instead of asking the question, instead of asking the uncomfortable question, the sales stuff. But it's easier to ask say a funny joke and then totally forget why you were there and leave and be like, oh, dang it.
But I feel like you're so relational though, Adam, that you're doing that to like build that bridge. I mean, maybe there is something behind it, but
yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm curious, I want to prod, what would be the uncomfortable question?
Just asking for the business, literally.
Oh, okay. So you're saying skit. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, then I think I kind of agree with what Stalin's saying in that instance. Like, you're just trying to, like, relational building is super valuable, but I don't know. Only the situation. So I'm not saying you're wrong, but pushing back a little bit there, just in the sense that humor has really good places, but
for sure. Yeah.
Shout out to my mom. She is also here. Visiting, so I do want to move on to the next question, if that's all right. Unless anyone else,
if it's all right with your mom, then
Rob, do you want to shout out to your mom too?
Robbie!
Hi, Mom.
Oh man, hi, Mom. Man, all right. Getting to the end of the chapter, the author talks about the benefits of removing the mask, which are deeper relationships, worthiness, richer experiences with others, healing, connection, and so on. This all sounds great, but what does this look like practically to take off the Joker mask for you?
I just want to read on page 138. So he's talking about gets you what you've always wanted, which is acceptance for being the opposite of what you've always been. Different. So like so much of the Joker mask can be like, oh, to fit in, or oh, to stay relevant, or whatever, right? But embracing like who you are and just being different and not necessarily caring what others think of you. Like I think sometimes I'm taking off the Joker mask and being like, hey, like I might not be hiding behind a bunch of pain. I just like to make jokes and quote Dumb and Dumber and be funny and try and make people laugh. And I'm kind of unapologetic about it, where, some of my jokes might cross the line and there's opportunity for growth in that. And especially in my marriage, when my wife wants to go deep and I just want to make a joke and she doesn't obviously appreciate
do you fart?
Especially in serious settings. But
Rob needs stink zap.
I what's that?
Rob needs stink zap.
Alien zap.
Oh, did you miss the ad earlier that Brooke read?
No, but that might be a good segue for my next ad. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Are your kids disobedient and don't listen to you? Are you tired of yelling "zip it" in uncomfortable settings like in church, at the movies, or in other public settings? Now introducing Zip It. Zip It is essentially a noise-canceling N95 mask that draws out the sound of your annoying kids. Why let your kids embarrass you when you can zip them up with Zip It? Zip It. Loving your kids by keeping them quiet. Disclaimer. Zip It is not responsible for any physical or mental harm experienced by children.
That's funny. That's funny.
Oh, I don't know, Garrett. I might have gotten off topic.
No, you're good. I'll just share.
Think by taking off the Joker mask, I have also realized that I just like having fun, man. And I think that I can, look myself in the mirror and realize that there are opportunities where I need to not rely on my jokes or my personality, but at the same time, I'm kind of unapologetic about just wanting to have fun with people.
Yeah. For this one, it's maybe twofold. This mask is not really one I feel like I really have a lot of issues with this time. But I would say there definitely are scenarios where maybe if I'm like meeting newer people, where I might like default to like being like the funny guy, kind of maybe as I was like kind of referring to earlier. And so I think sometimes using that as like a primary way to build a relationship is for me, it's maybe not always the best thing. I think there's time and place for that. But I think, so that's kind of for me on the personal side to work on. But I think also on the other side of it is when you see a friend or when I have a friend that is kind of just like making jokes about fairly serious topics, like just kind of like probing a little bit. And, if someone has a joke that seems very deflective, kind of just engaging in that and like kind of trying to get behind, is there anything behind that? And, when you ask someone like, hey, how are you doing? Actually like listening. And if someone just gives you like the basic answers, like maybe it's more to it, maybe there's not. But I think just being a part of like letting other guys also feel as though they don't have to always be on. I think sometimes we just feel like we have to like always be like performing and always be on top of things. And so maybe like, we use humor to rest and not engage in more of a conversation. And there's places for that too. But I think you're just kind of stepping into places where you feel like someone is just using humor as a way to not engage in a deeper conversation that maybe should be had. And maybe that's not something that's going to happen all the time, but on occasion, something to kind of look into.
Yeah, I think taking off the Joker mask for me, it would present an opportunity for more vulnerability and deeper relationships, like you were saying. I think I use humor as a way to deflect going into those deeper topics. And there are a couple of instances with my wife where one side is I was using the Joker mask in a bad way, but I think it could be also used for good. So, for example, I don't remember what we're fighting about, but Emily and I years ago were in an argument about something. I honestly don't remember what it was about, but I remember the next morning we were just not really talking to each other, just angry and not wanting to really be around each other because we were just mad. It was probably something that I did, but I would try to like make a joke in that moment just to ease the tension. And that was me trying to bring humor into a bad situation where it could have been an opportunity for me to, actually have a real conversation with my wife and get down to working through whatever it was we were fighting through. I would say that was the wrong time to use humor. But then on the flip side, I think, there's definitely a time and place to use jokes. There is another instance where, to be very serious, it was after we had a miscarriage. And the days and weeks after that, just the feeling of emptiness. This was before we had Lucy and Annie. And so we were just very, very sad that we had gone through a miscarriage and feeling like something was missing in our lives afterwards, and just the feelings of helplessness and not knowing what to do. But I remember there was a moment we were just like sitting on the couch tears in our eyes, crying, and I made a joke, and we both just started laughing for like minutes, and it was great. Like it just put us in a happier mood. We were able to talk through our feelings a little bit easier at that point, and just be honest with each other. Like it helped us be able to speak in that moment of sadness. Using that joke, whatever it was, broke the ice, and we were able to talk to each other and tell each other how we were feeling in that moment. And
That's good.
Yeah.
Billy, man.
Thanks for sharing
That's
that.
awesome.
Matt.
Billy, man.
Appreciate
thank
you,
you.
man.
Yeah.
My only comment here is I would agree and say I'm in the position that Flesh shared. I think I have overcorrected a little bit now that I've shared a little bit of background with my time overseas and stuff. That might make a little bit more sense. But yeah, sometimes I can try to just like, I don't want to say force serious conversations, but just like, hey man, how you doing? No, like, are you really doing okay? Like, just kind of like press into the issue of like, it's 8:30 on a Monday morning at the office. Like the guy just wants to get his coffee. You know what I mean? I'm exaggerating a little bit.
Yeah, man, get off my ass.
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but in all seriousness, so I think there are some times where it's like, look, sarcasm is part of American culture. Humor isn't bad. It's okay to crack jokes and be sarcastic, and being aware that like, hey, grabbing coffee at the start of the day isn't the time to have a serious conversation. And then I'd also say on the flip side, having the awareness when there is the opportunity to have a serious conversation. I can think of times, Matt's example is really good. There are times when my wife and I are having a serious conversation and I will try to crack a joke and it's like not appropriate at all. She's like, no, I want you to listen to me like that. I'm not trying to be funny right now.
There will be zero laughing right now.
Yeah, but I won't have that awareness because I either just, I don't know why, but sometimes I just don't have that awareness. So I would say it's also, I almost have overcorrected on both ends where it's like, I need to lighten up. I need to be okay with a little bit more sarcasm in my life. And then also when those opportunities come, because they do with friends or with my wife, things like that, those are the times when to really hone in and be grateful for those opportunities and not try to screw it up by making jokes that are at inappropriate times.
So. Yeah. I'm just kind of going back a little bit on this, but I can think of a time when I made fun of people in a positive way, ironically. But when I worked nights for FedEx during the pandemic, I think we're all getting crushed. Okay, with just all kinds. It just was a crazy time trying to get everything out in the city of St. Louis. Just everybody was insane. But we were all driving around till 10 o'clock at night doing all this, So everybody's on the belt before we go out and, everybody starts complaining about everything, everything's coming down. And I'm that goofball dude from the King of Queens. Like, have you seen that show?
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I just start roasting everybody. And everybody's laughing and it's like, it's hilarious, but I'm just digging into everybody. And, but like it made it not as bad, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So good. Like that's there are times where it's not healthy, but I think that's not always a bad thing. But yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, I think for me, taking off the Joker mask and kind of sitting in discomfort has been something I've gotten better at. I have to be very intentional about it by like doing a lot of meditation and just being able to sit in silence and kind of feel. It kind of helps me with healing.
In 31 degree baths.
Sometimes. Or not. But yeah, it's just taking out the Joker mask has helped with healing and connection for sure. And especially in emotional relationships, it can tend to sometimes be harder for me to open up in those situations. Not so much with you guys, but like in those kind of situations, it can be a little uncomfortable when starting a relationship with somebody and, wanting to tell them, like, do I tell them this part of my life or do I not? And kind of navigating that can be kind of hard sometimes. And so takes time to learn throughout your dating life, kind of figure it out along the way, make mistakes, learn from them, and But yeah, I think it ultimately good to have fun. You know, I quote movies from the 90s still all the time too. But then eventually you kind of have to take that mask off if you're going to be in a healthy, you know, intimate relationship. Sure. You know, that's something that's been tough. But when you find the right, I think when you find the right person, they take it well, and you know, it just kind of happens in there. Yeah. So but those are the things that have helped me personally.
That's great, man.
Yeah.
That wraps up our episode for the Books Brothers podcast. Next week, the bros will review and discuss the Invincible Mask. Thanks for joining us. If you haven't yet, buy or borrow the Mask of Masculinity and follow along with us. Please subscribe and give us a review. We would really appreciate it. Also, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or family member who you'd think would get something out of it. Finally, we'd love to hear from you. If you are challenged by our conversation or have any questions or feedback, email us at connect@booksbrotherspodcast.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Until then, read, reflect, and connect.